Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Eric Flores. He's a Republican candidate for the House seat in Texas's 34th Congressional District. Eric, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
I would love to start off the conversation by ticking off some bullet points on your resume. You're a veteran, a former assistant U.S. attorney. Now you're jumping into politics. So to start off, why exactly did you decide to run for Congress?
Great question. So along the trail, I have been saying that I'm not a politician. I'm a service member. I've served this country for over a decade, whether that's in uniform on Operation Guardian Support, in the federal courtroom as an assistant United States attorney with the criminal division in McAllen. And now as an attorney, I represent, several governmental entities. But, what brings me to the race, it's my service. It is, once again, I'm looking to serve this country and raise my hand for the third time to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It is time to send a service member to Congress to support President Donald J. Trump, who I'm honored and privileged to have his endorsement, as well as Speaker Johnson, move forward, this really important agenda, not only for the country, but for the constituents of District 34.
And before we get into some of those issues that really matter most to you, I want to get your reaction to some big news out of Texas over the weekend and see if that changed your strategy at all. Because we saw the results of a special election race in Texas. It was described as a political earthquake. Republicans in your state said that this was a wake-up call for the party. A Democrat flipped a state Senate seat in a district that not only President Trump won in 2024 by 17 points, the Democrat won it by 14 points, so there was an over 30-point swing. And this is a district a Democrat hasn't won in the state Senate in 4 decades. So to start off, what's your reaction there?
Look, when we jumped in this race, it's all about being methodical and deliberate, and that's what we need to continue to do in the midterms. So of course, we lost that race as the Republican Party, but I encourage all of the Republicans in Texas, to definitely be energized, to be motivated, coming into these midterm cycles. It's important that we continue to engage, that we continue to motivate everybody around us to ensure that something like that does not come November 4th.
Do you think that that's a sign for bigger things to come? I mean, does that concern you at all? Because not only were Republicans in your state talking about this, I mean, nationwide, Republicans were talking about this. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was sounding the alarm, other Republicans as well. What do you make of that?
Look, I think it serves as a great wake-up call. It was just a unique circumstance in that this election was held, right? It was a special election. We all know that those circumstances are very, very different. The gentleman who won, he won't even be able to cast a vote. He'll just solely be able to take that, oath. But I have full confidence in the Republican Party, as well as President Donald J. Trump, Governor Abbott, come the midterms in November, that we will get that seat back.
So let's talk about your race. I'm curious, what are some of those top issues? What do you really want to work on?
Look, myself, when I jumped in the race, I said, there was a bunch of what I call punchline candidates. So let's kind of walk through that. We have folks that say, well, border security. Well, the first question that I ask is, well, what does that person know about border security? So border security is still a very important issue for us down here in South Texas, even though President Donald J. Trump has brought us to a secure border, a 50-year all-time low with apprehensions. But we need to increase that. We need to continue to keep it up. As we're seeing less apprehensions, we are seeing a little bit more, trafficking in the narcotics range when it comes to fentanyl, to cocaine, and the gun trafficking as well. So we need to continue to enforce those laws that are in place, support law enforcement, whether it be Border Patrol agents or federal prosecutors. I myself, being a former federal prosecutor, know what good policy and bad policy look like. So we need to continue to support them there. And then, of course, some big issues. We need to focus on the workforce down here in South Texas. We need to continue to support our farmers. We need to, ensure that housing be affordable for our Americans. So, folks in my generation can look forward to purchasing their own home and starting their family. Most importantly, when they go to the grocery stores, we need to make sure that Americans are are afforded the opportunity to buy affordable groceries.
Those continue to be the top issues for Americans and for
Absolutely.
voters, immigration and the economy. Let's start with immigration because I've talked to members of Congress, lawmakers, politicians all over the country. And when we talk about border security, some have said every state is a border state. Texas is actually a border state, though. And I know you said that statistic that in fiscal year 2025, there was a record, a 50-year low of encounters at the border. This is drastically different than what we saw during the Biden administration, right? There were record high encounters at the border during those years. You're saying there's still work to be done, but the border is secure right now. I mean, how does this exactly impact your district?
Look, I think it is great, to finally see the laws enforced, right? Under the auto pen failed Joe Biden administration, he allowed, as well as, the incumbent right now, Vicente Gonzalez, voting for open borders. They allowed 24 million illegal aliens into this country. Via what I call the conduit of chaos, right? Title 42, catch and release, the one pass, right? All of these measures is what we are seeing, 24 million illegal aliens into this country. Now under President Donald J. Trump and the great leadership of Border Patrol, the border is secure. So we are not seeing, the ravishing coming through our communities, through the farmlands, through the riverfronts, through the ranches. So, it has been a drastic change with that. And, we're absolutely fortunate to have, now the men and women in Border Patrol and the prosecutors, doing the jobs that they were there to do, which is enforce the law.
CBP had the number of border crossings of undocumented migrants, the encounters there, closer to 11 million. But I do want to zoom out and talk about immigration as a whole, because a recent poll from Fox News shows mixed numbers on immigration, right? 52% of voters, the majority of voters, approve of how President Trump has handled border security, but 55% disapprove of his handling of immigration overall, and 59% of voters think that ICE's tactics are too aggressive, especially when what the nation has seen play out in Minneapolis. Just today, President Trump had an interview with NBC News. He was asked about what he learned in Minneapolis, and he said that his administration could maybe use, quote, a softer touch in its immigration enforcement operations. What do you make of those numbers, and what do you make of President Trump kind of changing course here a little bit, maybe saying, we could turn down the temperature, we could use what he said, a softer touch?
Look, I think going back to the CBP number of 11 million is it was far more than that. I lived it firsthand. For me, it wasn't a soundbite. I saw, hundreds of apprehensions a day. I think it's much closer to 24 million. But going back to, again, I think what what I call the mainstream media has done is really convoluted three issues here, right? You have border security, and the fact is that when people want to come into this country, they have to come here illegally, right? So the minute that you do not use a authorized port of entry and do not have the permission of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General of the United States, you have already committed an offense, right? Then we have our workforce, right, which we do have folks that come in to the country legally via the H-1B visa to work here, which I consider that the second facet. And then the third facet is our immigration system. Our immigration system is currently broken, and I think President Donald J. Trump, as well as Speaker Johnson, they're attempting to reform that. Oftentimes, I think the mainstream media convolute all of those three issues, and that's kind of what we're seeing in the media now. The ICE. When we talk about some of the operations that are taking place with ICE, again, that is a response, to allowing 24 million illegal aliens, or even if you go back to, the CBP reported number, 11 million, that is still far too many people that have been allowed to enter this country illegally. Those ICE agents that are out there in Minnesota, they are conducting legal enforcement operations, identifying those that have broken the law here in the United States.
I know when you say the mainstream media is convoluting these things, I'm curious because even President Trump said, maybe we could have used a softer touch here. It's not just Democrats saying this. Joe Rogan said he said he felt queasy about, essentially, that wasn't the word he used, but he said, I feel like ICE is like the Gestapo here. I don't like how aggressive ICE is being. I'm seeing these videos and I don't like it. The comedian Andrew Schultz, who interviewed President Trump before his election, he said, I really don't like what I'm seeing right now. So it's not just one particular party. I mean, these numbers are showing Republicans aren't too happy with how ICE is acting. Do you think that there needs to be a tamp down in temperatures right now when it comes to how ICE agents are acting, or when it comes to any of that type of immigration operation?
Look, I think some of the situations that have occurred, right, they appear, to be very aggressive in nature. But I think, again, we're only seeing, myself as being a previous investigator, as a federal prosecutor, a lot of those things are going to be investigated fully, right? But here are the facts. The facts is that you had citizens that were disrupting lawful operations, right? If you see some of these videos, right, we had one person who weaponized their vehicle against an agent, right, where she was not interrupting just for 30 seconds as the video showed, right? She was there since the beginning of the morning, interdicting in a lawful operation.
I just have to interrupt you right there, because it did look like, and I've watched the video, I would love, and we could talk about this when there's a fuller investigation, right? But it did look like she was turning her car the other way. And if you watch the video, it appeared to be either body cam or a cell phone video of the agent there. She was talking to him calmly. She pulls the car around. He is turning the car. It looks like she was shot multiple times. And then that agent, it appeared, based on what we could hear, we couldn't see him say this, but we could hear someone, it appeared to be him, call her an effing B word. He didn't bleep that out. I did. I mean, is that an appropriate way to act? Do you think that that is too aggressive?
Look, I think the best thing in this situation, right, to ensure that all of us remain calm, cool, and collected, is to allow the investigators to do their job, to allow the agents who are going to investigate that, to allow the prosecutors, to allow OPM and OPR do just that, investigate the facts to see whether the situation was handled appropriately or not.
And I know that you've said you've worked on the border before. You're coming to Congress, or you would want to come to Congress, obviously representing Texas, from Texas. You said that, border or immigration in this country is broken. What perspective could you bring? How could you fix that?
Look, we are, again, we're a border town. I say we are at the tip of the spear. If you look at the caseload that the McAllen Division alone, or the Southern District alone, carries, it's 36%. It is a huge, huge number. So I bring a very unique perspective. Right? I don't bring sound bites to Congress, that I've heard off of the media. Right? I bring firsthand experiences when it comes to border immigration enforcement policy. I understand the needs of the farmers. I understand the needs of the ranchers. I understand the needs of the home builders, right? We have a champion down here in South Texas, Congresswoman De La Cruz, who is championing Bracero Program 2.0, who is trying to get the workforce that South Texas needs. But there's also a balance with that when it comes to border immigration enforcement. So that is what I'm looking to take to Congress, right? Is firsthand experience, not ideas, their experiences.
Another top issue, obviously, the economy continues to be a top concern for Americans, and I'm sure the people of Texas. Recent polling shows a majority of Americans have a pessimistic outlook on the economy. Americans aren't feeling great about their current financial situation. There's a lot of concerns about affordability for everyday items. How would you make life more affordable for your constituents?
Yeah, so look, we are just over the year mark of President Donald Trump, his second term, what I call T 2.0. He passed alongside Speaker Johnson the working family tax cuts, which is honestly a monumental piece of legislation, not only for the country, but for South Texas. We're going to start seeing more money in the Americans' pockets. We're going to start seeing the support for the farmers, as well as the veterans' care, as well as having affordable groceries, right? No tax on tips. I think that is huge. We are just at the year mark. I think at the end of his term, God willing, we're successful in the midterms. They're not only going to be ideas, they're not only going to be talking points as we're just talking here. They're actually going to start feeling that. And the Americans, they are starting to feel that. We now see affordable gas prices. We're starting to see grocery prices fall. And it's been great for Americans. So I'm looking to take that to Congress and champion that. So it no longer is an idea, it's an experience for the Americans.
I know that in 2024, right, a big reason why Democrats lost is because people were saying, I don't feel good about the economy. I don't feel good about my current financial situation. Democrats were saying, hold tight, hang tight. But that wasn't the reality of a lot of Americans, especially Americans living paycheck to paycheck. So how soon do you think people will feel that relief? Because just numbers from the CPI and USDA show most grocery prices are up. It's estimated overall food prices will be up by 3% this year. So if I'm hearing that, and I live paycheck to paycheck, which is a reality for so many Americans, that's been a reality for me. I'm thinking, how much longer can I hold on? What would be your message for them?
Look, the message simply to Americans, but most importantly to Texas 34, is that help is already on the way. We see this monumental bill, right? The working for family tax cuts that has already passed. It is coming into motion. If we are already looking at the Water Treaty Act that Congresswoman De La Cruz and President Donald Trump have already delivered, that was millions of dollars to farmers and ranchers throughout, the state of Texas. Help is already on the way. These results are already on the way. Be patient with us. The economy, if we're looking at the numbers, if we're seeing the job growth, especially in South Texas, it is booming. We have LNG that is booming, whether it's at the Port of Brownsville or the Port of Corpus Christi. We're starting to see jobs increase. We have SpaceX as well. So, be patient with us. It is coming. And these are just not ideas. They are already happening.
This 34th Congressional District in Texas is one that was redrawn over the summer, but it's currently represented by a Democrat in Congress, Vicente Gonzalez. He outperformed President Harris in 2024. This is a district, but once again, before it was redrawn, that Harris lost, Trump won, but a Democrat in Congress won. Does that concern you at all?
No, absolutely not. President Trump won, pretty much all those 4 surrounding counties down there in South Texas, which were historically Democrat, as you just said, right? Let's take Willacy, Hidalgo, Cameron, Starr County. President Trump won all of those districts all those counties, in a historic fashion. But unfortunately, we had a nominee who had already lost twice, underperforming the president, right? And she could just not get her message across and resonate with the voters because there was no substance. When you have a career candidate who is just running time after time again, that just doesn't resonate with the American, worker, with the American, constituent who is, as you said, living from paycheck to paycheck. All they have to do is simply see there's a career candidate, who's living off of campaign funds. That's not what South Texas wants. South Texas wants somebody, of substance, who has a resume, who has leadership skills, to go and represent them in D.C.
Eric, I know that when you were taking off your resume, I was struck by your past, whether it be serving in the military or as an attorney. Those are 2 positions that you're going in and you're not asking people beforehand, hey, what party are you? Are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? Especially if you're in the military, you are protecting people from both sides of the aisle. So I'm curious, and I usually ask people this when they're running a campaign, when they're jumping into politics. Where is a place that you think you could work across the aisle? Where's a place where you could work with Democrats?
Look, that is, it's pretty simple, right? We always have to support our men and women in law enforcement. We always need to have the backs of, our men and women who are serving our country in uniform across all branches. We need to make sure that we continue to protect our senior citizens. And we need to make sure that we are being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, because they are paying, Americans on fixed incomes are giving 100%, they're paying 100% of their taxes. That means us as congressional leaders, as elected officials, we also need to be giving 100% of our effort as well and serving them with integrity and with duty.
The district you're running for is redrawn. Texas redrew their congressional map over the summer. California redrew their congressional map to directly counteract Texas's. Texas's, as we know, has the potential to flip 5 blue districts red. California's directly counteracts that. It will have the potential to flip 5 red seats blue. And the Supreme Court is allowing the California map to be used. So I'm curious, what do you make of this redistricting fight that we saw play out nationwide, A? And B, I know that your district was redrawn, but you've received some criticism that you don't actually live in that district. I mean, what do you make of that criticism? How do you respond?
Yeah, so we'll start there. My family and I just moved into the district. Before redistricting, it encompassed Hidalgo County, the county that I was living in. So, those criticisms I think are easily answered. Both my wife and I now live in Congressional District 34, and we're happy to tell the voters that, when it comes to redistricting, it is something that the highest court of the land has already upheld. And when that has happened, myself as a practitioner, it has been cleared by the highest court, which is the Supreme Court of the United States, holding that it was a lawful redistricting.
And then my last question to you is, I'm curious, what's next for your campaign?
Look, the momentum is absolutely tremendous. We have earned the endorsements of President Donald J. Trump, Speaker Johnson, Majority Whip, the Majority Leader, Mr. Emmer and Mr. Scalise. And one that I cherish as well is the National Border Patrol Council. I was in the trench with Border Patrol agents when they were being, punched in the gut, when they were being demonized. I was with them standing shoulder to shoulder. Those endorsements are absolutely awesome. I'm honored to have them. But, now for me, it's time to earn the endorsement of the voters down here in the district, all from the northern portion to the southern portion, to show them that I am the most qualified candidate to go up to DC to represent them. Again, we're not running on sound bites. We're not running on, campaign slogans, America First. We're running on credentials. We're running on experience. We're running on proven leadership. So what's next for our campaign is to continue to build the momentum and win come the general.
Eric Flores, I really appreciate the time today. Best of luck to you in your campaign, and I hope you can join me again soon.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and it was absolutely great. Thanks so much.